But I want to pick up here in Westminster the ongoing mission that Theresa May has in Europe as she tries to get some sort of change to the deal to please those back here. Principal of them, Jacob Rees-Mogg, who's chairman of the influential Eurosceptic group, of course, the ERG, joins me now. She's trying to do what you want.
I wish that the Prime Minister were trying to do what I wanted, that she made it clear yesterday that she wouldn't be able to get rid of the backstop. She seems personally committed to the backstop. And that's the real problem with the withdrawal agreement, because it divides up the United Kingdom between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It leaves us subject to the EU setting our tariffs, so setting tax rates in the UK, and it leaves us subject to the European Court of Justice in great swathes of public policy. So the backstop is a real problem, the whole thing needs to go. Getting a few warm words and a cup of cocoa really won't be enough.
The time for that language has passed, isn't it? Because the whole country now is very worried about what we're facing. And what we seem to be facing more and more likely every day is a no deal.
Well, leaving on World Trade terms, leaving on the 29th of March, is a perfectly reasonable thing to do.
Well, it is if you have a bilateral agreement with countries already in place. We have nothing.
Well, we are able to deal under WTO terms unless the EU were to punish us, in which case it would be in breach of a number of international treaties. Why should we assume that the EU will break the law to punish us? I think that is not the way civilised nation states behave. We buy £95 billion worth of goods more from them than they buy for us. There's a strong incentive for their exporters that we should carry on trading. It will allow us to cut tariffs on essentials, on food, clothing and footwear, reducing the cost of living for people, and we save £39 billion. Now, on the forecast...
Oh, you save £35 billion?
£39 billion, because we don't have to pay them any money if we leave.
We morally are obliged to pay that.
No.
Is there no moral case to pay that money?
No, I don't think there is, actually, because the European Union, for example, runs a pay-as-you-go pension system. When we joined the European Union, we paid the pensions of people who had retired before we had joined. They're now expecting us on the time we leave to do the reverse, to pay as if it were a funded pension. But that seems to be unreasonable morally to have it both ways around.
That have been undertaken that we have a responsibility for.
Likewise, when we joined, we paid our share of projects that had already been committed to. Can't have it both ways, and the legal position is absolutely clear. If we leave under Article 50 without having reached a withdrawal agreement, we owe no money, according to a House of Lords report which had many pro-Europeans on the committee. According to that committee, we owe nothing under EU, UK or international law, and that's very important.
What is it that you know that all those businesses, all those people who have said a no deal will be economically disastrous for the UK, and yet you stand here and say, no, we'll be fine. What do you know that they don't?
I know that they got it wrong before. So if you look at the Treasury forecasts about what happened...
I'm not talking about Treasury forecasts, I'm talking about real businesses.
Well, I run a business, so I'm involved in a business I set up, and so I have some business experience. The issue here is internationally based in London and in Singapore. We do not have an Irish office, in spite of what some people may have been chanting. We have funds in Ireland, in New Zealand, in Singapore, in the United States, because we're a global fund management company. That would be true of almost all fund managers. But on the forecasts, the Treasury forecast, just by voting to leave, that there would be up to 800,000 job losses. What has happened since is that their figures, they did two scenarios, a very bad one and a bad one. In the 2 years since they did their figures, the economy has grown 5.4% more than they predicted. So the forecasts before on this same Project Fear have been baseless. As for industry that's worried about just-in-time delivery, 21% of components for the car industry come in from outside the European Union. Just-in-time delivery is not a function of the European Union.
You describe Project Fear, and yet Project Fear appears to have been borne out by the very fact that Britain cannot get the deal with the EU that it wanted. Everything that you said would be a piece of cake, would be easily done. The promises that were made, many are saying on a false prospectus, looking back, just cannot be delivered.
I don't think there was any false prospectus. I think the arguments were put by both sides honestly and straightforwardly. Leaving on the 29th of March, WTO terms, puts us on a very well understood, well regulated, well used international footing in our dealings with the European Union.
On day one?
On day one, under WTO terms. Now, if the French decide that they're going to close Calais, as it happens that they've done before, at one point for 3 weeks, that would be in breach of their international agreement. So are you saying to me that the French will break international law the day we leave?
I'm not saying anything.
No.
Not that I'd be entirely surprised if they didn't, because none of us knows.
Well, if you work on the assumption that your friends and allies will break international law, then the whole basis of international order breaks down. I think you have to assume that people will behave in good faith under obligations that they are committed to well beyond the European treaties.
It's difficult, though, to pin a country's future on good faith. People are really concerned and worried now about what's happening.
No, people voted to leave. That's the key thing. 17.4 million people heard all these scare stories. They didn't believe them. So far they've been wrong. That the figures that were given have turned out to be fantasy figures. Do you remember George Osborne was going to give us a punishment budget, and the Government Bank of England said interest rates may rise?
I think
there was no budget, and interest rates
I think
fell.
anybody watching would just say a plague on all your houses, because both campaigns were guilty of mistruths at various points. And everybody's now been found out. The facts are, our Prime Minister is finding it impossible to get a deal that's acceptable to everybody.
I'm afraid the Prime Minister has not negotiated competently. And that's why we're in this...
What would you have done differently?
She should never have accepted the structure of the negotiations set out by the European Union, that we had to negotiate some things first, and that we've allowed the European Union to say it can't discuss the future arrangements, and then agreed to a backstop. But the backstop is a future arrangement, which apparently it can't agree to. So we've allowed the European Union to run rings around us.
And you don't think they'll do that if there is a no deal?
No, because the Prime Minister is a Remainer and she never really wanted to leave. And she said recently, which is quite an interesting comment, she said people who believe in leaving without a deal should be honest about the risks that come from that. Now that really doesn't square with her going around saying no deal is better than a bad deal. If she always thought that leaving without a deal was so dangerous, why did she go on and on about no deal being better than a bad deal? One or other of her statements can't be strictly accurate.
The one thing that must worry you is that the other option, of course, other than a no deal, is another vote. And I'm just wondering whether you agree with those who are saying that's now more likely than it's ever been.
Well, I don't think there's any majority in Parliament for it. That I was on a BBC programme yesterday with Mr. Moona, Chuka Moona, and he was saying in favour of a second referendum that he saw no majority in Parliament for it. It's basically a loser's referendum. It's for those who lost first time, who don't like the result and want it reversed. I think that's not a proper democratic method of proceeding. Bear in mind the first referendum was validated by an election promise from David Cameron to have it in the first place, and then by both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party confirming it and saying they would accept the result in the 2017 general election. We've had 3 votes around this referendum. To overturn it because a few malcontents don't like losing would be a democratic disgrace.
I just wonder if you ever, in the middle of the night, wake up and think, what have I done? What is this argument that I have been putting forward that's created so much anger out there? And you can see it. They're shouting at you. Many of these people are shouting at you directly. Well, do you not worry that that anger is in some way justified? People are worried about what's happening.
I think the divisiveness of the referendum is a great misfortune for this nation. If you wanted to double that and triple it, you would have a second referendum. If you think the first referendum was divisive, think very, very carefully about asking for a second one, because I think that would divide us even more. But people voted to leave. So no, I don't wake up in the middle of the night thinking, how have I caused this division? I think in the morning and in the evening when I go to bed that we have campaigned for democracy, so that when people vote they can change their government, that we won't be governed by unelectable, unaccountable people in Brussels who we cannot remove. We will be able to make our own laws. And why do I think that's important? Because I think the British people can make better laws for themselves than other people can make for us.
And you are hoping that European countries who up until now have been our friends, we are now turning our backs on, will play fair in your language. That's what you are hoping.
We're not turning our backs on them. We're remaining members of NATO. We have other alliances with them, particularly in relation to security. We're simply leaving the European Union, which was supposed to be a trading organisation. We're not staying in a trading club. It's not turning our backs on them. The European Union, the member states remain friendly nations and allies who we will be willing to defend if they need defending under the NATO obligation. So I think there is an issue with language, and I accept that all sides fall foul of this from time to time because we don't differentiate enough between the European Union, which it is a blessing to leave, and Europe, which it's a blessing to belong to, and the two are different and separate concepts.
Jacob Rees Mogg, thank you very much for your
Great
time.
pleasure. Thank
Thanks
you.
for talking to us.